Glen Wolsieffer was tall, handsome. He had the whole package.
Betty, his wife, she was an all-American girl.
He sees this shadowy figure wearing a clear type of mask. Glen is struck on the head. Betty was strangled.
People were really afraid.
It caused a lot of fear.
We just did not have enough solid evidence.
People wanted to see it solved because they didn't know whether or not their home may be next.
Murder's always a tragedy. You know, there's no winners in murder.
Police sirens pierce the Saturday morning calm of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.
I received a call around 7 in the morning. I reported to 75 Birch Street in Wilkes-Barre City. One of the patrolmen explained to me that there was a body.
The patrolman tells Detective Swarren an intruder has broken in and murdered a young woman, Betty Wolsieffer.
It's signs of trauma.
Checked for pulse, see if there was any breathing, any signs of life, anything like that. There was nothing whatsoever.
Betty was found laying on the floor. She was obviously strangled.
The victim's husband, Glen Wolsieffer, tells cops he was also attacked.
Got to the kitchen, I don't remember.
Glen Wolsieffer was downstairs.
Somebody knocked me out. I woke up on the floor.
He was hit over the head, and he believes he may have been unconscious.
I saw somebody there. Yeah.
Betty Wolsieffer's senseless murder rocks the town. Crimes like this don't happen in Wilkes-Barre, least of all to pillars of the community like Betty and Glen. Carol Crane follows the story for the local paper.
So what are you going to do at school today?
Everyone looked upon them as the all-American family, you know, the husband, the nice wife, and they had a beautiful little girl, Danielle.
Love you. Love you.
Glen was a very good dentist. His patients liked him. He had built up a really nice practice for himself. And because they were a prominent family, you know, a lot of people would go there.
He had the, let me say, the Tom Selleck look. Tall, handsome, physically capable, so he had the whole package.
Betty was very diminutive, very quiet, but just a real soft-spoken person, very kind, very gentle. She was an all-American girl.
But now Betty is dead. Investigators start piecing together the hours before Betty's murder.
The night of the murder, Glen had gone out with friends. He had been drinking with the guys.
He told us that he was out with some friends as normal on a Friday night into Saturday morning.
Glen arrives home late. It's past 2 in the morning.
He had gone to bed with his wife, and his daughter Danielle's asleep in the bedroom next to them. He's awakened by a bang. He grabs his .22 caliber revolver. He sees this shadowy figure wearing a clear type of mask.
Glen goes downstairs to confront the intruder. But then he's grabbed from behind.
Struggle ensues. And then he's struck on the head.
When he woke up, reached up and grabbed the wall phone and called his brother, Neil.
Neil, get over here. Somebody broke in.
His brother lived right across the street.
Oh, Glenn!
Neil called 911
My brother's been knocked out.
and told them, my brother's on the floor, he was knocked out.
Yeah,
He was pacing back and forth, up and down.
In the confusion, neither Glenn nor Neil went upstairs to see if Danielle or Betty was okay. As Danielle is cared for by relatives, it's up to the cops to tell Glenn his wife is dead.
And he couldn't believe it.
The police need to find the deadly intruder fast, before he strikes again. The trouble is, they have no idea who they're looking for.
If you don't solve the homicide within the first 72 hours of it happening, the likelihood of solving it later is greatly diminished.
Glenn wanted to go to the hospital. He was hit on the head. He had a bump that was back there, and the ambulance came.
Glenn has lost his wife, Betty, the woman who was his high school sweetheart. His daughter, 5-year-old Danielle, has lost her mom. As Betty Wolsieffer's body is laid to rest, the task of hunting down her killer kicks into high gear.
It would be premature at this time to indicate whether or not there are any suspects in this case until the investigation reaches that point in time where we can say with some certainty that we have information that could possibly lead to a criminal charge against anybody.
Betty and Glenn's home is combed for clues.
Forensic unit, they came in, they did fingerprinting, photographing.
They're looking for any kind of evidence that could be helpful.
We were going through the crime scene. The story that Glenn gave, we were just trying to put together.
In the small town of Wilkes-Barre, a family has been torn apart, and a killer is on the loose.
People were really afraid.
It caused a lot of fear, a lot of panic. And people wanted to see it solved because they didn't know whether or not their home may be next. And when something of this magnitude, of this violent nature happens in their own backyard, they're wondering whether or not that could happen to them.
In Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, a home invasion has left a young mom dead and her husband with head injuries.
There was a lot of concern in the neighborhood that, there was a killer loose, an intruder.
The horrific murder of Betty Wolsieffer sends shockwaves through the once idyllic town.
Wilkes-Barre was a very tight-knit community. People grew up together, they went to school together. They found jobs here, and they lived here, for their entire lives.
In Wilkes-Barre and beyond, everyone wants to know, who killed Betty Wolsieffer?
The press began going after this case because they knew what type of area it was in Wilkes-Barre, and they knew how the city of Wilkes-Barre was. The media kept asking questions. They were, and I don't want to say hounding, but it got to the point where you were trying to do your work and you had people that were already there at the crime scene.
That was one of those things around here that the headlines are out there, it's on the nightly news. He certainly was known, and he's a physician, and it got a lot of attention. I'm sure it was the first thing on the TV programs, on the news shows, and it got a lot of attention for a long time.
The cops know there's been a series of break-ins recently, and strangers seen hanging around the neighborhood. Only the week before, Glen reported seeing someone trying to cut through his screen door.
Somebody who was roaming around the alleyways. Somebody knew that Betty was home alone. Somebody who knew that she had a young child. Somebody who knew that Glen didn't get back home until all hours of the night.
It isn't just the rash of home invasions that concerns detectives. Recently, Betty had been complaining of crank calls late at night. Maybe she was deliberately targeted. Police carefully examined the crime scene.
There's a ladder, and we went out and looked at it. Somebody went up the ladder, broke the window, and that's how they came in.
The master bedroom was in disarray. You could tell that there was a fight, something physical that went on.
But for Detective Swarin, something doesn't add up.
There's nothing taken. There's nothing gone.
The only person who may be able to clear up the mystery of why the intruder stole nothing is Betty's husband, Glen. He's in the hospital, recovering from the injuries he sustained during the break-in.
We went to the hospital, asked if we could see the injuries. He had a wound to his head.
But investigators are astonished to discover Glen has hired an attorney, and he's advising his client not to talk to the cops.
We weren't allowed to go in there with him. We could just look, and he was sitting up in a bed.
At Glen's side is his younger brother, Neil. Neil was the first on the crime scene. Unable to talk to Glen, investigators focus on what his brother can tell them.
We brought Neil in, we sat him down, and we talked to him to see if he knew anything.
Neil explains that Glen phoned in a panic, telling him to get over to his house.
The first thing that Glen does when he regains consciousness is call his brother.
What Glen doesn't do is make sure his family is okay.
Now, his daughter is upstairs, and his wife is upstairs. And the first thing he does is call his brother.
Neil did say to us that neither one of them had gone upstairs.
Neil's statement strikes investigators as unusual. Neither Glen nor his brother thought to check on Betty or 5-year-old Danielle.
Now, wouldn't one of the first things a person would normally do if you were attacked within the confines of your home, immediately run upstairs to see about the well-being of your daughter and your wife?
Glen's injuries may have stopped him from going upstairs, but investigators want to know why Neil didn't check if his sister-in-law and niece were safe.
And the answer was, I don't know, I didn't go upstairs.
That's not all that's bothering Detective Swarin. There was a delay between Glen's call asking Neil to come over and Neil's call to 911.
Neil was a very nervous person, very nervous. When we got and talked to him the first time, he had the shakes. He'd cry, put his hands in his face in his hands.
Investigators believe Neil knows more than he's letting on. They start to wonder, was he involved in the crime?
We interviewed Glen Wolsieffer 3 times and said, you know who we are, you know what we're looking for. You know, give us an answer, help us out.
Detectives are convinced Neil holds the key to unlocking the secret of Betty Wolsieffer's savage murder. Now, they've got to get him to talk.
We decided we would like him to come back for a lie detector test.
Neil refuses. He tells his friends he feels hounded by the police.
There was a perceptible change in him after Betty's murder. You could tell something was weighing so heavily on him.
Then Neil has a change of heart and decides to meet with investigators.
He called, said, "I'll sit down and I'll talk to you. I have some information for you."
Detective Swarm believes he's their best hope of solving the mystery.
It was about 9:15. We received a call, and the dispatcher asked, "Are we waiting for anybody?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "We're waiting for Neil Wolsieffer to come in." He said, "We just had a fatal accident." Myself and Detective Mitchell went to the scene, and sure enough, it looks like he crossed over into the center lane and he hit a cement truck head on.
Neil Wolsieffer is dead.
At that point, we felt that that was our closest we were ever going to get to what happened, to the story.
The question on detectives' minds, was this a tragic accident or the desperate act of a man with something to hide? Moments before he's due to talk with detectives about the murder of his sister-in-law, Betty, Neil Wolsieffer is killed in a car crash.
Well, they say he drove his car into the path of a truck. At first, it appeared it was an accident, but then when you found out he was on his way to be interviewed by investigators, you began to immediately think, was it really an accident? The truck driver insisted that it appeared that he purposely pulled that car in front of him.
Neil was Glen's younger brother. The two men were always close.
I don't know if he had any best friends, but Neil was his best friend. You'd always see them together. They were all one big family.
Neil looked up to Glen, and anything that Glen did, Neil tried to do better.
And for Glen, Neil would do anything, perhaps even make the ultimate sacrifice.
I think he had an awful lot on his mind. I think he was afraid he was going to hurt the family. We sat down and we talked about it, and we think it's probably suicide.
This is he, yeah.
Glen gets the news his brother is dead. No one, except perhaps Glen, knows why Neil killed himself.
Got to a point where we hit a stone wall. We were blocked.
With Neil dead and Glen not talking, investigators change tactics. They decide to look deeper into Glen and Betty's marriage. Was it as picture perfect as everybody said?
They came across as good people, religious background. Betty would go to exercise classes. Glen would go play softball. Betty's happy-go-lucky.
She was a hard worker, too. She would work to make a great marriage. She would work to make a great home. And I don't believe that anyone ever had a bad word to say about her.
And just started collecting information from neighbors, associates, anyone who had contact with him.
That's when they learn Glen is leading a double life.
He was cheating on his wife. He was a no-good.
He started having an affair with his dental hygienist. It was getting pretty hot and heavy. They were regularly meeting in hotels.
The hygienist, Debbie Shipp, is pulled in for questioning. Under the police spotlight, she reveals all about her love affair with Glen.
She was willing to talk about the depth of the relationship she had with this married man.
According to Debbie, Glen tells her he's passionately in love with her. He wants them to spend the rest of their lives together.
Glen Wolsieffer was going to be leaving the wife for her. They were looking at jewelry and things like that.
There's more. When pushed further, Debbie reveals some startling information. She had sex with Glen the afternoon before Betty was murdered. Debbie gives investigators what they've lacked, a motive for murder.
It made the case, I thought, stronger.
They are now certain Glen Wolsieffer murdered his wife, Betty. Detectives put together a new theory. Neil had no direct involvement in Betty's murder. But Glen may have burdened his brother with a confession that he killed Betty.
Our feeling then and our belief then was that we thought that he just couldn't live with what he knew.
Faced with betraying the brother he idolized, he took his secret to the grave.
The people that knew Neil knew how he would have felt if his brother had indeed killed Betty. And would he have done that? Would he have sacrificed his life to save his brother? He was so torn between lying and giving up his brother that he chose not to do either.
But what investigators don't have is proof.
It was hard to believe at the time that, the doctor had killed his wife.
Glen sticking to his story. An intruder broke into the house and murdered Betty.
And that was the difficulty of this case. Disproving what he said. Disproving it, which is very difficult when you have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So I wanted certain things redone, people re-interviewed, evidence retaken, certain evidence taken to the state police crime lab, just to make sure that all the T's were crossed and all the I's were dotted.
Investigators have to find a way of nailing Glen. Betty's autopsy reveals traces of Glen's clothing under her nails, indicating they may have had a fight.
That by itself didn't mean anything. He was her husband. If she had fibers from his clothes under her nails, that could be explained in several ways.
Detectives take another look at Glen's injuries. They can't talk to Glen, but they can talk to his medical team.
The treating physicians said in one of the reports that, the wound to the back of the head could easily have been done by just bumping your head in a backwards motion to the corner of a wall.
His head wound was superficial. It would not have been enough to render him unconscious.
Glen's story doesn't add up. And now, they're finding the crime scene doesn't either.
When we saw the ladder initially, it just didn't seem to match up to what we were being told.
The ladder, it's backwards. The rungs are the wrong way. And there was no indentation into the grass that would indicate pressure was put on that ladder. So to me, that was odd. Was it planted?
How did the person get out of the house? Did they go back down the ladder? If they did, that ladder really would have been depressed.
In fact, Glen had frequently used the ladder himself.
A neighbor had seen Glen Wolsieffer, when locked out of the house on previous occasions, use that ladder to gain entry into his home. And that's exactly the entry that existed the morning his wife died. So I found that hugely coincidental. I just was very pleased with the information that she shared with us. I thought that was key. The house itself, it was a nice home, but by no means was it a glamorous or 10,000 square foot home with lots of good artwork and things like that that would attract maybe a burglar to enter the home, especially an occupied home. Why would someone then also go up the back ladder into a second floor window to a home that really was not of big magnitude as far as belongings and things like that? It just didn't fit together.
That's not all. Forensic analysis reveals the bedroom window may have been smashed from the inside. Investigators are certain Glen has invented the tale of a mystery intruder to cover up his own crimes.
I thought the crime scene was definitely staged.
But to win a conviction, investigators must prove that beyond all reasonable doubt. It's time to call in the FBI.
I thought a trip to Washington, D.C., may be worthwhile. Let's get an expert profiling opinion.
The feds have huge expertise in analyzing faked crime scenes. They'll re-examine the evidence to see if they can make a case for Glen as the murderer.
They started helping us. We started finding out now what a staged crime scene is. How do you stage it? What do you do? What should you do when you're staging it?
The way the room was turned over to make it look like there was a scuffle or some type of struggle, it was not the way it would have been if there was a real struggle that went on.
The FBI's conclusion reinforces the detectives' hunch.
The FBI Behavioral Science Unit, with their expert profiling abilities, confirmed that it was a staged crime scene.
It didn't make sense. It didn't have the ring of truth to it. And that was one of the reasons we focused on Glen.
Investigators believe they have an airtight case against Glen. Their task now is to convince the DA.
If you bring charges, you have to be sure that there's evidence to go forward. I mean, eventually a jury may decide in any given case that somebody's not guilty, but it's a tremendous responsibility when you're bringing charges against someone, especially murder.
The DA's answer leaves investigators reeling.
The DA's office simply felt that we just did not have enough solid evidence to have him indicted or charged. We had no physical evidence. He certainly hadn't said anything. Nobody else, there were no other witnesses to it.
The decision to not charge Glen with murder strikes a hammer blow.
I can understand the hesitancy of prosecutors to act because you had to disprove what he said happened. And that is not an easy chore. People became so frustrated that, some people would start saying, there's one place you get away with a homicide, and that's in Wilkes-Barre.
Everyone working the case is convinced Glen Wolsieffer is a murderer. A murderer who has just cheated justice. "12 months have passed since Betty Wolsieffer was murdered in her Pennsylvania home. Investigators have gotten nowhere prosecuting their prime suspect, Betty's philandering husband, Glen. Confident he's escaped the clutches of the law, Glen's gone back to his old ways. He's resumed his dental practice, while the rumor is he's working his charms on his dead brother's widow.
There was a talk about the town whether or not Glen Wolsieffer and Nancy were getting too close for comfort, let us say.
Nancy doesn't think Glen is a murderer, and she and Glen are thinking of leaving Wilkes-Barre and starting a new life together in Virginia, along with Glen's young daughter, Danielle.
Nancy Wolsieffer stuck close to Glen. She didn't believe it was him.
Then, Nancy's world collapses. She finds evidence that Glen is still seeing his former lover, dental hygienist Debbie, the woman he had sex with just hours before his wife was murdered.
Her heart was broken, and she believed that Glen did that to her.
If Glen's lying about Debbie, asks Nancy, what else could he be lying about?
She was very brokenhearted, but very bitter, too.
Nancy talks to the police.
Nancy helped us out. She had information that we were able to use.
Nancy helps police build their profile on the lying, cheating Glen.
He's super charming, he's super manipulative.
And when detectives delve deeper into the events on the night of Betty's murder, they discover Glen has yet another woman on the side, Carol Kapicki. He met her in a gym. She's married.
She was one of the babes that he had been running around with.
We learned at this point that Glen had not only a wife and a child, but he had a mistress, and he had a mistress on the mistress.
He had this alter ego where he flaunted his marriage vows and took off with all these other women, one right after another.
It all helps paint a picture of a ruthless Romeo who will say and do anything to satisfy his lusts.
The women which Glen Wolsieffer was carrying on these affairs with, he was just selling them a bill of goods. He was in it for one reason and one reason only, sexual gratification, and it just told me a lot about him as a person. You know, it was all about him.
When police speak to Carol, she provides another piece of the jigsaw. She tells detectives that the night of Betty's murder, she bumps into Glen in a bar. Carol is with her husband, and that enrages Glen. The question for detectives, was Glen angry enough to murder his wife?
That was a big piece of circumstantial evidence, because the whole case was circumstantial evidence.
The tide has finally turned for the cops.
Maybe he had thought he was quietly having affairs with them, but the mistresses were his unraveling.
As the investigation ramps up, Glen is feeling the heat.
While they were investigating the case, Glen did continue his dental practice, but it started falling off as more and more facts were revealed. It just became uncomfortable for him here. I think he felt the hounds nipping at his heels. He got so hot that that's why he blew town and moved to Virginia.
Glen moves south, settling down in Falls Church, Virginia, with Carol Kapicki and his daughter. Then, the breakthrough investigators have been working for. A new witness comes forward, Barbara Wendy, a close friend of Glen's murdered wife.
Well, it just happened to be that Barb saw a lot of things.
3 days before she was murdered, Betty confides in Barbara. She knows her husband is a serial adulterer. And there's more.
Barb said Betty had marks on her.
Oh my God, Betty.
Betty had black and blue marks where they argued and they struggled. Barb kept telling Betty, said, Betty, you have to do something. Something's got to change. You're not going to make it like this.
Betty tells her friend she's had enough. On the night she was murdered, Betty was intending to confront Glen about his abusive behavior and adultery.
She said to Barbara, Wendy, well, tonight's the night. If he doesn't come home on time, I'm really gonna go after him.
With Barbara's damning evidence, detectives believe they finally have enough to convict Glen.
We sat down and we made the decision that we're gonna go after him.
Investigators go back to the DA.
I said, this isn't going to get any better. We're going to act. We thought we had the probable cause that we needed to justify the issuance of the arrest warrant, and we did it, and we held our breaths.
Three years have passed since the murder of Betty Wolsieffer. Glen Wolsieffer has been living as a free man. Then, late one fall afternoon, police swoop in on his home in Virginia.
We surrounded the house.
Warrant for your arrest. Please turn around. Arrest for murder.
Told him he was under arrest. He was charged with homicide. He was taken and then brought back to Pennsylvania for his arraignment.
It takes another year to build the case against the Casanova dentist. Glen's trial opens November 5th, 1990, in the Luzerne County courtroom, amid a media frenzy.
At the trial, there were a lot of women that came because they just wanted to see firsthand what he looked like. Because of his many dalliances, the trial took on the spectacular, the sensational, handsome doctor kills his, pretty little wife.
The trial starts with a coroner describing what Betty looked like when her body was found.
I do remember that they had asked Dr. Hudak what was the condition of the victim's face. And he said it was, I don't know how he started his response, but it was something to the point that, you could tell she had been beaten and brutalized. And they said, can you describe the condition? And I believe Dr. Hudak said hamburger. And when he said that, I looked over at the jury, and there was a woman, I thought she was going to go down for the count. She was one of the jurors, I think, really took that hard and got, weak from it. And but she was okay, just regained her composure. But that was a powerful statement.
The case against Glen is clear.
We believe that he staged a crime scene, and that was the basis for the prosecution.
But to win a conviction, they must prove their case beyond all reasonable doubt.
You never know what a jury's going to do. You only need one juror to have reasonable doubt, and then you're not going to get a conviction.
Glen exercises his right not to take the witness stand.
Most defendants in criminal trials don't testify, but that jury is going to be told over and over that that is his right, and you can't assume anything from that.
He was kind of like not really a whole lot responsive to anything. I would see him, talk to his attorney or talk to his family.
The defense, their take was, there's no evidence here.
The defense team argues Glen is the victim. First, he and his wife are attacked. Second, he's unfairly targeted by the police for a crime he didn't commit.
Glen Wolsieffer was asleep with his wife. An intruder enters the house, kills his wife, and here they're asking you to convict him of homicide. He's fortunate he wasn't a victim of homicide. There really wasn't much concrete physical evidence. It was almost completely a circumstantial evidence case.
Glen is confident there's no direct evidence to prove he murdered Betty.
But any prosecutor worth their salt will tell you that a strong circumstantial evidence case is as powerful, if not more powerful, than some cases involving direct evidence.
By pointing out that Glen has a motive and that the crime scene was staged, prosecutors hope to convince the jury that no one else could possibly have carried out the crime.
She had marks around her neck, which were pre-mortem, which was before she died, and there were marks on her neck like after she died, like if someone just kept going, didn't stop.
It again points to the prosecution's argument. No one but Glen could have murdered Betty.
Anyone involved in prosecution of homicides over a number of years will tell you that a strangulation, death, indicates normally, not in all cases, but normally, that the person who did it was close to the person that's dead. There's usually a relationship there. It's indicative of that. Not in all cases, though, but that certainly was another factor. And we did have experts say that same thing, that manual strangulation is usually the type of death suffered by someone who was close to that other person.
Special Prosecutor Anthony Sarcione details the state's case against Glen Wolsieffer. In the early hours of August 30th, 1986, his wife Betty had decided enough was enough.
His gallivanting has to stop. I'm not going to let him step on me anymore. She said that.
She waited up for him.
Where were you?
She was going to confront him.
I have something to say to you.
Why? You always have something to say.
She started questioning him.
I know you are lying. I know you're lying.
Lying about what?
I found a shirt with lipstick.
He was going to be exposed. And he did not want that to happen. Not at all, because that would have crushed his squeaky clean image, and that sparked the rage in him, and enough for him to turn violent.
Glen and Betty get into a fight.
He kicks at the door. He starts to strangle her.
Not only did he manually strangle his wife, but also used a ligature around her neck to ensure that she'd be dead.
After choking his wife to death, he carefully fakes the supposed home invasion. He puts up the ladder. He smashes the bedroom window. He stages the aftermath of a life-and-death struggle with the masked intruder. He bangs his head against the wall to pretend he's been injured by his attacker. It's now down to the jury to decide who's telling the truth.
When the jury came back with the verdict, the courtroom was icy cold and just as still as still could be, very quiet. They asked the jury, first-degree murder, how did you find? And they said, not guilty.
It just didn't make sense. It just didn't add up to me.
I sat there in shock because I thought for sure they would get him on first-degree murder. And I thought, I don't know if he's, he could walk.
It looks like Glen Wolsieffer will get off scot-free.
But then they got to third-degree murder, and they found him guilty.
The jury decides Glen had no prior intent to kill Betty. It was a crime committed in the heat of the moment.
I couldn't help but feel bad for his mother, because that was her son. But then I couldn't help but feel bad for Betty's family because they had lost her, and that was their daughter.
I knew eventually it was going to happen, and I felt it was going to happen, but I was somewhat taken aback when I got the news.
It was hard. It was hard going through each day. You get through them, but it's there every day, every night.
Glen Wolsieffer is sentenced to 8 to 20 years in prison for the murder of his wife, Betty.
I think it restored a sense of justice to the community at large in Wilkes-Barre, because a lot of people had lost faith in the justice system because of him walking free for so many years after the homicide. His philandering and murdering his wife impacted so many people. If he would have just owned up to it initially, it would have saved his brother's life.
Murder's always a tragedy. You know, there's no winners in murder.
Looking at the family, they had closure, and I think that's what they needed to know. They needed to know that he did it, that Glen is the one who killed her.
Glen served 13 years for his crime. He was released in 2005 after finally admitting his guilt. He's now living back in his hometown of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.